It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of self-reliance. An Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
This is our country.
Greetings and welcome again to An Economy of One. I am your host, Gary Rathbun. We're going to get right into our next guest. I'm going to skip past the normal housekeeping stuff I do. Joining me now is Alan Gottlieb. He's the chairman of the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. He serves on the board of directors of the American Conservative Union and written about 20 books, of which I have several. Alan, welcome to An Economy of One.
Hey, Gary, it's really great to be with you. Thank you.
I saw you very briefly. We just kind of said hello out at CPAC. You were out at CPAC several weeks ago, and didn't get a chance to have you on air out there, but glad to have you here. I got, I don't know whether I call you a partner in crime or certainly a close acquaintance.
An accomplice.
Dr. Brian Patrick is joining me on the show tonight as a co-host. And he carries a very endearing picture of you around with him everywhere he goes. I'll let him describe that.
Yeah, Ellen, how are you?
I'm great, Brian. It's good to hear your voice.
Good to hear yours. I've got this wonderful picture. And actually, I don't carry it everywhere I go, but I certainly brought it down to the radio station. And but it is on the office wall, my office wall. And it's this wonderful shot of you holding a check from the city of Chicago to the Second Amendment Foundation to the tune of $399,000 reimbursement over legal expenses. And I'm probably Chicago versus McDonald or McDonald versus Chicago, one of those cases. But I like it because people, it calls attention to something Second Amendment Foundation does that people don't know about. The fact that Second Amendment Foundation pursues litigation in the direction of gun rights. And without Second Amendment Foundation, we'd be an impoverished nation as far as rights go.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I'm actually looking at a blow-up picture of that check hanging on my wall right now in my office, with Rahm Emanuel's signature on it, which is very disappointing him to have to sign that check. Yeah. But, yeah, that was the McDonald v. Chicago suit that the Second Amendment Foundation brought that knocked out Chicago's handgun ban and also incorporated the Second Amendment through the 14th Amendment, making it applicable to all the states, a major Supreme Court victory and one of the key cornerstones of Second Amendment legislation today.
Excellent. Did the check clear?
The check cleared. Yeah,
Excellent.
We were worried about that. With the economic state of Illinois these days,
that's right.
That check today, I'd be very concerned about that clearing.
You know, we just hung up just a few minutes ago. Was speaking with Tom Gresham, who I'm sure you're familiar with. And before I get into some of the constitutional questions I have, tell us a little bit about the Second Amendment Foundation. I'm not sure how many of our listeners are fully aware of your organization and what you do.
Well, we were formed in 1974. We now have about 650,000 members and contributors. And, we're an educational, legal defense, research, and publishing nonprofit 501c3 organization. And, of course, about 80% right now of the case law made on Second Amendment rights, defending Second Amendment rights in our courts, are suits that we have brought directly or paid for.
Wow.
You guys are active in many states and municipalities. I know that for a fact.
That's tremendous. Tremendous.
So. Yeah, well, actually, our footprint has been spreading around the globe, so to speak. We just recently won a little over a week ago a major case for Second Amendment rights in the Northern Mariana Islands, Saipan, which is a Commonwealth of the United States, and therefore we argue they have the same protection citizens there people who live here in the States do, and they had a total ban on handguns, sort of like the one we overturned in Chicago, on the one who was overturned in Washington, D.C., and a judge there just recently ruled in our favor and enjoined the state from enforcing their handgun ban and ordered that they issue permits for people to be able to not only own guns but be able to carry firearms for self-protection. And so that was actually the last handgun ban in the United States or its territories, and we just knocked it out.
That's incredible. I want to ask, Tom Gresham gave us some very sobering insights when I asked him about the importance or the impact of Justice Scalia passing away from the Supreme Court and what his replacement is likely to be and the ramifications. We've seen headlines that, this could be the death of the Second Amendment, depending on who gets into office and who gets approved on the Supreme Court. What's your thoughts on Justice Scalia passing away and the impact on our rights?
Well, it's a national loss for the whole country, particularly Second Amendment rights advocates. For me, it was a personal loss because I got to meet and know him. I spent a fun day with him in Nuremberg, Germany, going to a major gun trade show in Nuremberg and discussing Second Amendment rights. So I got rather close to him, and it's a horrible loss. And of course, right now the impact is felt with a 4-4 tie. We only won our two key Supreme Court cases on 5-4 decisions. So a 4-4 tie means we cannot virtually make any good Second Amendment case law right now at the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, if in fact an anti-gun judge is appointed, it's going to make it next to impossible to do that. So we're very concerned, particularly the fact that President Obama nominated Judge Garland to get that position. Mm-hmm. Judge Garland has a record of anti-Second Amendment rights in two major cases that he's heard. He wanted to reconsider at the appeals court level. He wanted to reconsider the judge's ruling and the appeals court ruling itself because he wanted to do it in Bonk that overturned the Washington, D.C. handgun ban, which, of course, later on became known as the Heller case at the U.S. Supreme Court, which we won. And he was on the other side of that. And likewise, a case that the National Rifle Association brought when he was just a district court judge, whereby they were upset that the FBI was keeping the records of people who passed the background checks to buy guns, which they're not supposed to keep in a computerized database or have a national registration scheme or system. They're supposed to destroy the records of the good guys who passed. They can keep the records of the bad guys who lied and need to go prosecute, but they're not supposed to create a database of everybody else. And this judge thought it was okay for them to do that. And, of course, he was later overturned by the appeals court. So his record on Second Amendment rights is not very good.
Yeah, I very concerned about that. And like you said, it's very sobering. I hate to use the cliche that this presidential election could be one of the most important of a generation, but next president could really elect or nominate 2, 3, maybe even 4 Supreme Court justices.
Well, it only takes one to vote the wrong way now, and we lose on a 5-4 majority to go into a 5-4 minority. So I don't think it's just the most important election of a decade. It might be the most important election for gun owners in a century.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll fight this battle for many years to come.
I'm sure.
No doubt.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Alan. I was just looking at some of the agendas of the anti-gun people. I have this fantastic, and I mean fantastic in the sense that I mean fantasy, report from the Brady Center. It says the truth about kids and guns. And it starts out with bizarre conjectures, something like 2,700 children and teens lost their lives to guns. How do you counter nonsense like this? Because I look at this thing, and it's apparent they're talking about 19-year-olds in Chicago murdering each other, not children. But how do you, as a Second Amendment Foundation, counter this sort of propaganda?
Well, not only that, but if I'm not mistaken, that propaganda goes to they count children, anybody under the age of 25.
Wow.
In that particular database. If you're using the same database, I think that I know that they do use from time to time, and so that's a little bit crazy. But even if we just take your 19-year-old that you just gave as an example, a 19-year-old gang member selling drugs in the streets of Chicago isn't exactly a child, and if he gets shot by another drug dealer, it's not exactly, in my opinion, a tragedy for society. I hate to say that. But the bottom line is, a lot of those numbers are bad guys shooting bad guys, not bad guys shooting good guys. Mm-hmm. So those numbers are very skewed and misleading. It's also in those numbers as well. If somebody 19 years old broke into your home and you shot and killed him, and it's a justifiable homicide, that number still goes in that database as well. So again, it's another bad guy shot by a good guy. Defending himself, but it goes in there and the Brady Center uses those people as if they're victims.
Mm-hmm. I know for a fact that to really understand some of these reports, you almost need training and research methods because they're filled with operationalizations, they call them, arbitrary definitions. But yeah, I mean, a layperson has trouble dealing with this kind of stuff. How do you guys sort it out? I mean, I know you have good information networks and you try to counter this, but how do you get people who read the New York Times to understand something?
Well, I'll
Careful, I read the
difficult,
New York Times. But
Well, let me rephrase that. How do you get people who believe the
there
New
you
York
go.
Times to
There
understand
you
something?
go. Yeah.
Well, of course, all this information they give out like this in cliches is aimed at the basically low information voters, so to speak.
Right.
But our problem is it gets spread by publications like the New York Times, as an example, who are sympathetic to the Brady Center and their anti-gun rights agenda, and as a result, spew it off like it's fact, even and then even say where they get the numbers from. And that's a problem for us to counter, because when you have mainstream media, so to speak, coming out and saying that these numbers are legitimate, it makes it very difficult for us to counteract, especially when that same media doesn't give us an equal voice, equal time. So we have to rely, quite frankly, on radio shows like this one to be able to get the real numbers out and get the real views out.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. We're talking with Alan Gottlieb, probably the nation's biggest expert on the Second Amendment and founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. Alan, I have to take a break. We got a few more questions for you. Can you hang on for a couple minutes?
Sure, my pleasure.
I appreciate it. I'm Gary Rathbun with Brian Patrick. This is an Economy of One.
This is an Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
We're speaking with Alan Gottlieb. He's chairman of the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms and founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. Alan, Brian and I have talked quite a bit about the level of ignorance in our, I hate to call them leaders, let's say politicians, lawmakers, and that kind of stuff. They just don't know anything. They don't want to know anything. They don't understand guns or magazines or ammunition or anything. What do you see as the biggest battle you're fighting right now? What is the biggest threat coming from?
Well, I think the biggest threat we face right now is a conglomerate of anti-gun prohibition groups that are all funded by Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, known as Every Town against gun violence, Moms Demand Action. They've got several other names as well. Mayors
Alan,
Against
is
Illegal Guns.
Enough one of these groups? The group Enough? Is that one of these groups? Because it sounds like it.
Yeah, I think Enough is part of that coalition as well.
Yeah.
And the problem is Michael Bloomberg is spending like $50 million a year funding this effort that amounts to funding ballot measures, certain political candidates, an anti-gun news site that's out there that just spews forth tons of articles that then get used by mainstream media to propagate myths and false information, as well as funding these action groups that show up and testify at legislatures and picket gun stores and do all kinds of activities of that nature. So he's added more money per year in the gun rights battle on one side than is spent by all the gun rights groups combined.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, it's interesting that you mention Bloomberg, because I just read an article, in the last couple days about stabbings the number of stabbings going way up in New York City, and people are concerned about getting stabbed.
New York has a record number of people being stabbed, and of course, again, if you make it hard for law-abiding citizens to carry a firearm to protect themselves,
right,
you're a victim out on the streets. Criminals know you're not armed, and they're coming after you. If they don't have a gun, they're going to do it with a knife.
Right.
And so it's a big problem in New York. And it's part of Bloomberg's legacy. And Mayor de Blasio has just one-upped Bloomberg, so to speak, and making it more difficult for not only the citizens but for his own police department to defend you.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're probably more familiar with these statistics than I am, but murders in Chicago, one of the most regulated cities out there, I think the number was like 84%, higher than last year's.
And last year, I think, was a record.
Yeah.
It was 84% on top of a record. And Baltimore is the same way. It's really interesting. If you take a look at cities like New York, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington D.C., Los Angeles, the cities with these high crazy crime rates.
Mm-hmm.
They're all cities that make it next impossible for you to get a permit to carry a firearm to defend yourself when you're out of the house for self-protection. They're all liberal Democrat mayors. They're all cities that are city councils under one-party control. Doesn't that tell you something?
Well, and it also tells us something that they all have armed bodyguards protecting them.
And they're also part of Hillary's campaign focus.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Actually, we just came out with a news release today from the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep Your Arms, calling on the Democratic National Committee, since they believe in gun-free zones and banning people's right to have a firearm for self-protection, that they should give up their armed security at their national convention and practice what they preach.
Right.
It's a little hypocritical for them to try to disarm everybody else, but then when they meet and get together to do it behind armed security, they should give up the same. They have to live the same way they want the rest of us to live. And so we've just called for them to make their convention a real gun-free zone and not have any armed self-bodyguards or protection there.
Yeah, I think it was Mark Levin that I heard say there's no such thing as a gun-free zone. What they are unarmed victim zones.
That's the perfect way to characterize it.
It's just incredible. We got about a minute left. I wanted to get your opinion because I think this is kind of a left-handed way they're going to attack us from the ammunition side. They're constantly attacking the guns, the gun dealers, the FFLs, record keeping, background checks, all that kind of stuff. We don't see a lot about ammunition. Is that also a battlefront out there?
Yeah, aren't there ammunition bans or attempts in like Washington State, Seattle now? Or am I mistaken?
Yes. Well, it's not a ban in Seattle. It's a tax on guns and ammunition. So they're taxing, by doing it, they end up taxing gun stores and sporting goods stores out of business. So they have to move and leave the city of Seattle because people aren't going to come in and spend 2 or 3 times more for their ammunition or their firearms in the city, and so they go out of business. And so basically what they've done is they've made it impossible to sell guns and ammunition in the city.
Yeah. Yeah, I've told...
San Francisco's done the same thing.
Yeah, I've told people when they put a high tax on ammunition, all they're doing is making it worthwhile to steal now because it's worth a lot more, So we've been talking with Alan Gottlieb, probably the nation's best expert on the Second Amendment, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. Alan, I really appreciate your time. We're going to put your foundation information up on our website and our Facebook. And I've really enjoyed this. I consider it an honor. I appreciate all the work you do for us. And I hope we can talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Have a good evening. Be well. I'm Gary Rathbun with Brian Patrick. It's an Economy of One.